The evening air in the suburb of Crestview carried the final warmth of the day, a gentle, fading breath that rustled the leaves of the mature oaks lining Maple Drive. Eleanor Richardson began her walk home as she did every Tuesday after her volunteer shift at the community center, her steps measured and deliberate on the familiar pavement. At 62, her posture was straight, a lifetime of quiet dignity held in her shoulders and the steady forward gaze of her dark eyes. The reusable canvas tote bag in her hand swung lightly, carrying the remains of a casserole dish for a neighbor recovering from surgery. She knew these streets in a way that went beyond mere geography. She knew their rhythms, their secrets, and their stories. She knew which house had the sun away at college, which garden won the neighborhood prize each summer, and which porch light flickered because old Mr. Jenkins always meant to fix it, but never quite got around to it. For 30 years, she had walked these sidewalks, watching saplings become shade trees and new families put down roots, her own life intertwined with the very soil and concrete of the place she called home. The light was in that transient golden phase just before dusk, casting long, softening shadows that painted everything in a hue of nostalgic amber. She passed the community garden she had helped establish a decade prior, now bursting with late summer tomatoes and climbing beans. A little further on, she nodded to the little free library her son, Marcus, had built and installed for her birthday 5 years ago. It was slightly overstuffed, a testament to its use. She exchanged a brief, warm wave with Jim from 2 doors down, who was meticulously watering his hydrangeas. "Evening, Jim," she called, her voice calm and clear. "Night, Eleanor," he replied, raising his watering can in a salute. "Tell Marcus we're still on for Chess Tuesday. He's not getting out of his rematch." She smiled, a genuine expression that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "I'll remind him." "He's been practicing," she said, the pride in her son a quiet, constant hum in her heart. This was her tapestry. These small exchanges, these threads of connection, built over decades of simply showing up, of caring for the space and the people within it. But as she turned from Maple Drive onto the quieter, more residential stretch of Cedar Lane, Eleanor felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, as palpable as a drop in temperature. The golden light was leaching away, replaced by a cool blue twilight that seemed to drain the color from the world. The friendly sounds of suburban evening, the distant chime of an ice cream truck, the laughter of children playing in a backyard, the murmur of televisions through open windows, began to fade, swallowed by an encroaching silence. It was a silence Eleanor recognized, one that had become more familiar in recent years. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of contentment. It was a watchful, wary silence. It was the sound of deadbolts turning a little earlier, of blinds being drawn a little tighter, of a community unconsciously holding its breath. She felt it on her skin, a slight prickle of awareness that had nothing to do with the cooling air. Her hand tightened just a fraction on the strap of her tote bag, not from fear, but from a deep, weary recognition. It was the feeling of being an outsider on the very streets you helped build, a guest in your own home. She continued, her stride never breaking, her eyes fixed ahead on the path she knew by heart. Her mind, however, was fully present, cataloging details. The Smith's car was gone. They must be at their daughter's recital. The customary glow from the Reynolds porch was dark. They were on vacation. The block felt emptier than usual, exposed. And then she saw them. Under the flickering, faulty streetlight at the far corner where Cedar met Pine, 3 figures were clustered around a modified sedan with glossy rims and tinted windows. They were young, late teens, their bodies angled in a practiced pose of casual loitering. Even from a distance, she could see the way their energy disrupted the stillness, a ripple of unrest in the settling dark. One of them, a tall boy with a shaved head, nudged another and pointed in her direction. Their collective gaze, a palpable force, swung toward her. Eleanor's breath remained even, but inside, her spirit sighed a sigh of infinite fatigue. It was a look she knew too well, a look that didn't see Eleanor Richardson, volunteer, neighbor, mother, cornerstone. It saw only an outline, a stereotype, a convenient target walking alone as dusk surrendered to night. She didn't alter her course or her pace. To do so would be to grant their judgment a power it did not deserve. She simply moved forward, each step a quiet testament to her right to be there, the distance between her and the group under the flickering light steadily, inevitably closing. The final threads of daylight vanished, leaving the world in the hands of the streetlights and the gathering shadows. The stage was set, and the boys, confident and sneering, had already decided on their role. They had no idea they were about to stumble into a story far bigger than their petty prejudices, a story whose central figure was the woman they now presumed to intimidate. The distance between Eleanor and the group of boys closed with each of her steady, unhurried steps. The flickering streetlight above them buzzed like an angry insect, casting erratic pulses of jaundiced light that made their movements seem jerky and theatrical. As she drew nearer, details resolved from the shadows. The tallest one, who had pointed, had a sharp, angular face and close-cropped hair, wearing a varsity jacket from a high school across town. The one beside him, shorter and stockier, fidgeted nervously, his eyes darting from his friend to Eleanor and back. The third, leaning against the driver's side door with a practiced nonchalance, was clearly the ringleader. He had cold, pale eyes and a smirk that seemed permanently etched into his features. His arms crossed over a tight-fitting t-shirt. Their conversation died abruptly as she came within earshot, replaced by a heavy performative silence meant to be intimidating. Eleanor kept her gaze fixed on the path ahead, a technique she had cultivated over a lifetime, a way of acknowledging a threat without granting it the satisfaction of her full attention. She planned to pass them as she would pass any other fixture on the street, with a polite and neutral distance. This plan dissolved as she was about to parallel their position. The ringleader, the one with the cold eyes, uncrossed his arms and took a single deliberate step off the curb, not enough to block her path entirely, but enough to force a conscious decision. "Well, look what we got here," he said, his voice a lazy drawl meant to convey boredom, though an undercurrent of excitement thrummed beneath it. Eleanor did not break stride, simply adjusting her course slightly to walk around him. This seemed to irritate him. The stocky one moved to the other side, creating a loose human funnel. "Hey," the tall one in the jacket said, his voice higher, more nasal. "You deaf? He's talking to you." Eleanor stopped then, not out of obedience, but out of a strategic understanding that ignoring them further might escalate the situation more quickly than engaging with it. She turned her head, meeting the ringleader's eyes. Her expression was not one of fear, but of weary patience, like a teacher confronting a disruptive student for the third time in an hour. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the tense quiet of the street. The question, so ordinary and reasonable, seemed to throw them momentarily. They were prepared for cowering, for hurried apologies, for frantic scurrying. This polite, firm inquiry was off their script. The ringleader recovered first, his smirk widening into a grin that showed too many teeth. "Help us!" "Nah, we're just wondering what you're doing around here. This isn't exactly your kind of neighborhood, is it?" The emphasis on "er" was deliberate, a blunt instrument. The stocky boy let out a short, forced chuckle. Eleanor took a slow breath, the air cool in her lungs. "Well, I live here," she stated, a simple fact delivered without embellishment. "A bullshit," the tall one spat, his nervous energy morphing into aggression, emboldened by his friend's lead. "And nobody like you lives on Cedar. You're lost, or you're looking for something." The insinuation hung in the air, ugly and familiar. "I am not lost," Eleanor said, her tone even but firm, leaving no room for argument. "I am on my way home. Now, if you'll excuse me." She made to move forward, but the ringleader shifted his weight, now fully blocking the sidewalk. The physical space shrank, the atmosphere thickening. "Your way home?" he mocked, mimicking her diction with a cruel, exaggerated accent. "Listen to that. You talk real proper. Think that makes you better than this place? Think that makes you belong here?" His eyes raked over her, a look designed to reduce and assess. "You people always come in, thinking you can just take up space." The word of "people" was a grenade with the pin pulled. Eleanor felt it land in the pit of her stomach, the old, familiar ache of hatred disguised as commentary. She saw not just three boys, but the long, twisting history behind their words. She looked at the ringleader, really looked at him, past the bravado to the emptiness beneath. "What is it you think you're protecting?" she asked, the question so quiet and direct it was more disarming than any shout. "These houses? These gardens? Do you know who tends that community plot on Maple? Do you know who started the neighborhood watch on this very block after the series of break-ins 5 years ago?" Her questions confused them. This wasn't about her defending herself. It was about her questioning their very right to challenge her. They were prepared for a conflict of races, not a conflict of belonging. The stocky boy looked at his leader, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. The ringleader's face flushed, the smirk finally faltering under the weight of her impassive gaze. He hadn't gotten the reaction he wanted. The fear, the tears, the validation of his perceived power. All he got was a profound, unsettling calm and a series of questions he couldn't answer. His hand, which had been resting casually in his pocket, clenched into a fist. The dynamic was shifting, and he felt the control slipping from his fingers. Anger, hot and defensive, began to replace his cool cruelty. "I don't need to know any of that," he hissed, taking half a step closer, invading the last vestiges of her personal space. Then the air crackled with the promise of something worse than words. The confrontation had moved past its opening salvos. The true test was now beginning. The invasion of her space was a calculated act, a final physical punctuation to his words. The ringleader, Jake, she would later learn his name was, stood so close now that Eleanor could see the faint, angry acne scars on his temples and smell the stale, sugary odor of energy drinks on his breath. His cold eyes bored into hers, demanding submission. Behind him, his two friends fanned out slightly, forming a loose semicircle that cut off any easy retreat. The quiet street, with its darkened, silent houses, felt like a sealed arena. The flickering light above them stuttered, plunging the scene into near darkness for a second before spluttering back to life, making the moment feel fractured and surreal. "You don't need to know," Eleanor repeated softly, not as a question, but as a sad acknowledgement. That is the heart of it, isn't it? Not knowing and fearing what you don't know. She did not step back. To step back would be to cede ground, not just on the sidewalk, but in the fundamental standoff of wills. Her heart was a steady, strong drum in her chest, a rhythm of resolve, not panic. Years of facing subtler versions of this same hatred, the closed doors, the clutched purses, the assumption of her being out of place, had forged a stillness within her. This was merely a cruder, louder manifestation. Jake's fist, clenched in his pocket, emerged. It was empty, but it was a signal. The tall one in the varsity jacket, emboldened by his leader's aggression and stung by Eleanor's calm, moved to the trunk of their car. With a metallic thunk, he popped it open. The sound was shockingly loud in the hushed air. He rustled inside for a moment before straightening up, turning around with an object in hand. It was a baseball bat, not old and splintered, but new, metallic, and ominous under the streetlight. He tossed it underhand to Jake, who caught it with a slick, practiced grab. The dynamic shifted palpably. Words had failed them. Now they relied on the cold, simple language of threat. Jake hefted the bat, letting the weighted end tap lightly against his open palm. Thwap, thwap. The sound was dull and final. "You talk a big game for someone in the wrong place," Jake said, his voice lower now, stripped of its mocking drawl. It was pure, focused menace. Maybe you need a clearer message." The stocky boy, whose name was Leo, swallowed audibly. Jake, man, come on," he muttered, his earlier bravado evaporating. This had escalated beyond name-calling into a territory that smelled of real, irreversible consequences. Shut up, Leo," Jake snapped, never taking his eyes off Eleanor. The bat, in his hands, was an extension of his frustration. She was supposed to be crying. She was supposed to be running. Her continued stillness was an insult to the power he thought the weapon granted him. He took the bat in both hands and swung it idly in a short, vicious arc beside him, the metal whooshing through the air just inches from the sedan's side mirror. The message was unambiguous. Eleanor watched the bat's path. A profound sadness welled up in her, momentarily surpassing caution. These were children playing with the tools of ruin. They had no conception of the weight of the object in their hands, of the lifelong echoes a single swing could create. For her and for them. Her eyes moved from the bat to Jake's face. "That bat," she said, her voice still impossibly even, "it can break bones. It can shatter a life. But it cannot make this your street. It cannot make you respected. It can only make you a criminal." "You think I care?" Jake barked, a vein pulsing in his neck. He was unraveling, his control dependent on her fear, which she steadfastly refused to supply. "I think you haven't thought about it at all," Eleanor replied. You are acting a part, but the man who will be arrested, the man who will stand before a judge, that won't be a character. That will be you. Jacob, isn't it?" She had guessed, piecing together the nervous friend's utterance, but the use of his full name had the impact of a slap. His eyes widened just a fraction. How did she know that? Odd. He covered his shock with a step forward, raising the bat horizontally now, holding it between them like a barrier. The gleaming metal was a foot from her chest. "You don't know anything about me." "You are correct," Eleanor conceded, and for the first time she took a step, not back but to the side, forcing him to adjust his stance. It was a small, graceful move that broke the static tension. "I do not know you." "But you presume to know everything about me. You see my skin, my age, and you have written a whole story. A story where you are the powerful one, and I am an intruder to be removed." She glanced at the bat, then back into his eyes. "That story is a fiction. Put the bat down, Jacob. Walk away. This fiction only ends in tragedy." The tall boy, Ethan with the varsity jacket, shifted his weight, his confidence eroding into anxiety. "Ick, she's not scared, man. This is weird. Let's just go." "No," Jake roared, the sound echoing off the silent house fronts. He was committed now, trapped by his own performance. The bat, still held between them, began to tremble slightly, not from fear, but from the intense, conflicted force of his grip. His knuckles were white. He was at the precipice, and Eleanor's serene refusal to either fight or flee had left him with no clear path. Violence was the only tool left in his script, but using it in the face of such calm, articulate opposition felt suddenly terrifyingly real. Eleanor saw the conflict in his eyes, the battle between wounded pride and dawning, horrifying comprehension. She held her breath. The next second hung in the balance, suspended between the whoosh of the bat and the silence of reason. In that eternal instant, the quiet neighborhood witness, a silhouette behind a curtain in the house behind Jake, finally lowered their phone and pressed a button, sending a silent, digital plea out into the night. But on the darkened sidewalk, there was only the bat, the boy, and the woman who stood as an unyielding testament to a truth he was not yet ready to learn. The tremor in Jake's hands traveled up the length of the aluminum bat, a faint, telltale vibration that betrayed the storm raging behind his cold eyes. The weapon was no longer just a threat. It had become a conduit for his confusion, a heavy, awkward object that had failed to perform its singular function, to instill terror. Eleanor watched the subtle play of muscles in his jaw, the dilation of his pupils in the erratic light. He was a boy on a cliff edge, and she understood that the wrong word, even a flinch, could be the gust that pushed him over, so she gave him neither. She offered stillness. "Put it down, Jacob," she repeated, her voice not a command, but an invitation, an invitation to step back from the edge. "This performance is for an audience that isn't watching. These houses," she gestured with a slight tilt of her head to the darkened homes around them, "the people inside them are my friends. The Mitchells, the Garcias, old Mrs. Wilkins who you helped carry her groceries last winter. Or did you forget that?" Jake blinked, thrown. Thrown? How could she know that? It had been a gray afternoon, his mother in the car nagging him to be useful, and the old lady had looked so small, struggling with her bags. He'd done it sullenly, for his mom's approval, not for thanks. He'd never connected that frail white woman to this black woman standing before him now. Eleanor saw the memory flicker in his eyes and pressed the slender advantage. "You carried her bags to this very porch," she said, nodding toward a neat bungalow with a ramp. "She told me about the polite young man who helped her. She was grateful." "That is the neighborhood you are in, not the one you are trying to create with this." Her eyes flicked to the bat. "Now that's different," he stammered, the cohesion of his hostility fracturing. "Why?" Eleanor asked, the single word a gentle, devastating probe. "Because she looked like you." She looked like you. "Kindness has a race in your world. Community has a color." She took a small, deliberate step forward, not toward the bat, but toward him as a person. The move forced him to either swing or retreat. He did neither. He stood frozen, the bat now feeling like a lead weight between them. You live in a world of intersections, Jacob, but you only see the lines. You see me at one corner and assume you know my entire journey. You have no idea of my journey." Ethan, the tall one, edged backward, his earlier anxiety blooming into full-blown apprehension. Jake, seriously, this is too much. Let's bounce." The slang sounded hollow and childish in the charged air. "Shut up," Jake yelled, but the force was gone. It was the rasp of someone trying to reignite a dead fire. His gaze was locked on Eleanor, not with hatred now, but with a bewildered frustration. She was dismantling him piece by piece, not with counter-threats, but with a reality he couldn't refute. He grasped for his discarded script. You're lying. You don't know Mrs. Wilkins. Oh, Helen Wilkins, Eleanor stated calmly. Her son David died in Afghanistan. She has a tabby cat named Mr. Mittens who is frankly too fat. She grows prize-winning roses but can never remember to take her blood pressure medication. I bring her pills in a weekly dispenser every Sunday after church. Each detail was a brick, rebuilding the real neighborhood around his imagined hostile one. Each fact was unassailable. Leo, the stocky friend, had gone pale. Dude, my grandma talks about the lady who brings her communion. Is that... Oh! He couldn't finish the sentence, just stared at Eleanor with dawning, horrifying comprehension. The bat in Jake's hands lowered an inch, its tip now pointing toward the ground. The symbolic barrier was falling. His bravado was deflating, leaving behind the raw, insecure core. Well, so what? He muttered, but it was a whisper of defeat. So you're some do-gooder. Doesn't change you being where you don't belong. Eleanor's smile was thin, sorrowful. I belong more than you know. I helped plan the block party you enjoyed last 4th of July. The fireworks fund. I was the treasurer. The new playground equipment at the elementary school. My letters to the city council got it funded. She paused, letting the scale of her embedded life sink in. You are threatening a woman who has baked casseroles for your neighbors in grief, organized collections for families who lost jobs, and tutored children in the library, including, I suspect, some you might call friends. Now, your performance of protecting this street is an insult to everyone who actually builds it, including you on your better days. Jake's arm went slack. The bat's end tapped softly against the concrete with a dull clink. The fight had drained out of him. Not beaten out by force, but evaporated by the sheer, overwhelming weight of truth. He wasn't a defender. He was a vandal in the town square, and the monument he was defacing had just spoken, listing the names of every citizen who had helped carve it. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The silence that followed was different from the tense quiet of before. It was the silence of a paradigm shattering. It was in this void of collapsed aggression that a new sound finally pierced the night. Not the sirens yet, but the distinct growing purr of a powerful, well-tuned engine approaching at a deliberate speed. Headlights turned the corner, washing over the scene in a wave of bright white light. The car, a sleek, dark SUV, didn't speed up or slow down. It simply rolled to a smooth, silent stop at the curb opposite them, its driver's side window already down. The interior was dark, but the silhouette of the man behind the wheel was imposing, his head turned, watching them. The arrival felt neither coincidental nor frantic. It felt like a judgment that had been expected and had now calmly arrived. The sudden, silent appearance of the SUV acted like a physical force, freezing the scene in its new blinding light. Engine's low idle was a steady, ominous purr compared to the ragged tension of the previous moment. All heads turned toward the vehicle. For Jake, the interruption was a lifeline thrown to his drowning pride. The bewildering, morally suffocating conversation with Eleanor was cut short, replaced by a new, more familiar kind of threat. Another outsider, another variable to dominate. The bat, which had sagged toward the ground, came back up, not to threaten Eleanor this time, but as a reflexive brandishing toward the new arrival. His cold eyes narrowed, squinting against the headlights' glare, trying to make out the driver. Who the hell is this? Jake snarled, his voice regaining some of its former bravado, now directed at the anonymous silhouette behind the wheel. You're Uber, Grandma? Too bad it's about to have a flat. He took a half step toward the curb, tapping the bat menacingly against his palm again, the thwop sound returning, a desperate attempt to recalibrate the power dynamic. Eleanor, however, did not look toward the SUV. Her eyes remained on Jake, filled with a profound and sudden pity. She understood what he did not. Jacob, she said, her voice low and urgent, a final warning. Don't. This is not your path. But Jake was no longer listening to her. The SUV represented a clean enemy, an uncomplicated target for his rekindled anger. The driver's door opened. A man unfolded himself from the vehicle, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a calm, deliberate economy. He was dressed in dark, casual clothes, nothing threatening, but his presence was immediately immense. He didn't slam the door, he closed it with a soft, solid thud that resonated in the quiet street. He stood there, one hand resting on the roof of the SUV, his face still in shadow from the streetlight behind him. "The show's over, kids," the man said. His voice was deep, level, and carried a quiet authority that didn't require volume. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being heard. Walk away. Now. Ethan and Leo instinctively shuffled backward, their bodies recognizing a genuine threat where Eleanor's moral courage had only confused them. This was a language they understood. Jake, however, emboldened by the bat and the need to save face in front of his crumbling audience, puffed out his chest. "Or what? You gonna make us? This is a private conversation. You're the one who needs to drive away, brother." He loaded the last word with a sneering emphasis, a clumsy attempt to racially taunt the new man as well. The man didn't rise to the bait. He simply pushed off from the car and took 2 slow steps onto the sidewalk, now fully illuminated by his own headlights. The light revealed a face in its late 30s, clean-shaven, with sharp, intelligent eyes that took in the scene. The 2 cowering boys, Jake with the bat, and Eleanor standing serene and unharmed in the center. His gaze lingered on her for a half-second, a silent check, and she gave an almost imperceptible nod. His attention snapped back to Jake. "That woman," the man said, pointing a steady finger at Eleanor without looking away from Jake, "is my mother." The words landed, but their full meaning took a second to penetrate Jake's adrenalized haze. His smirk returned, cruel and dismissive. "A little family reunion, so what? You gonna call the cops, mama's boy? Go ahead, we'll be gone and we'll be back." He directed this last threat back toward Eleanor, a final vicious attempt to reclaim his narrative of intimidation. The man's expression remained impassive, but a flicker of something dangerous, like ice over a deep river, passed through his eyes. "Ah. You threatened my mother with a bat," he stated, the words flat and cold as stones. "Yeah, I did, and I'll do worse if I see her around here again. You people need to learn your place." Jake spat the words out, the ugliness now fully unfurled, a last desperate stand on the hill of his prejudice. The man, Eleanor's son, went very still. Then he did something unexpected. He chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound. "On my place," he repeated as if tasting the words. He took another step forward, now only 10 feet from Jake. "Or Jacob Rayner. Your mother is Cynthia Rayner. She works in billing at Crestview Medical. Your little sister, Chloe, is in the 7th grade at Roosevelt Middle School. She has a peanut allergy." He spoke with the detached precision of someone reading a file. With each sentence, Jake's smirk dissolved, replaced by a creeping, bloodless dread. "Your place, Jacob, is currently balanced on a knife's edge. You are holding a deadly weapon, having made terroristic threats in front of multiple witnesses, including the woman who organizes the Families in Need Fund that helped your own family pay their mortgage last winter when your dad was laid off at the plant." The air rushed out of Jake's lungs as if he'd been punched. The bat felt suddenly radioactive in his hands. His friends stared at him, their eyes wide with shock and betrayal. The secret hardship, the shame his family had guarded so closely, laid bare by this stranger. "You can't know that," Jake whispered, his voice breaking. "I know because my mother is the chair of that fund," the man said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that carried further than a shout. "She reviewed every application. She fought for every family, including yours." He finally looked at Eleanor, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second, with a depth of respect and love that was unmistakable, before turning back to Jake, his expression hardening into finality. "So, before you talk about our place, Jacob, you look at the woman whose compassion kept a roof over your sister's head. You look at her, and you tell me again what you're going to do." The aluminum bat slipped from his numb fingers, clattering loudly on the pavement, a shocking, hollow sound that echoed the emptiness now consuming him. He stood exposed, not just as a bully, but as a hypocrite, a beneficiary of the very grace he was trying to bludgeon into submission. He could not meet Eleanor's eyes. He could only stare, horrified, at the man who knew everything, the son who had emerged from the shadows not with fists, but with the devastating, unanswerable power of truth. The clatter of the bat on the pavement was the period at the end of Jake's sentence. It echoed against the silent houses, a final, hollow admission of defeat. Jake stood over it, hands now empty and trembling, staring at Marcus, Eleanor's son, as if he were a ghost conjured from his deepest shame. The two other boys, Ethan and Leo, were statues of pure panic, their eyes darting between the fallen weapon, the imposing stranger, and the now illuminated face of the woman they had terrorized. The dynamic had inverted completely. They were the ones exposed, trapped in the glare of the headlights and the weight of a reality they had been too ignorant to perceive. From the shadows of the neat bungalow with the ramp, a porch light flicked on, not the harsh floodlight of alarm, but a soft golden glow. The front door, which had been opened a mere crack, now swung wider. Framed in the doorway was Mrs. Helen Wilkins, a small, frail woman in a quilted housecoat, her white hair in a loose braid over one shoulder. In her hand, held with surprising steadiness, was an old-fashioned cordless phone. Her eyes, magnified by thick lenses, were fixed on the scene not with fear but with a fierce, protective resolve. She was the silent witness who had watched the entire confrontation unfold, her heart pounding against her ribs, her finger hovering over the call button until the very moment the bat had been raised. She had not called the police. She had called a number she knew by heart, a number saved in her phone under a Marcus Urgent. "Are you finished, Jacob?" Eleanor asked, her voice breaking the stunned silence. It held no triumph, only a deep, weary sadness. She looked not at the bat, but at the boy's face, watching the arrogant mask crumble into the lost, frightened visage of a child who had gambled everything and lost. Jake couldn't answer. His throat worked, but no sound emerged. The revelation about the Mortgage Assistance Fund had been a surgical strike, severing the tendon of his moral posturing. He wasn't a protector. He was a petitioner. The woman he sought to exile was the very architect of his family's stability. It was Mrs. Wilkins' voice, thin but clear, that carried from the porch. "His mother is a good woman, Cynthia is. Works herself to the bone. She'd be sick to see this." She took a small, hesitant step forward, clinging to the doorframe for support. Eleanor, honey, are you all right? Are you all right?" Eleanor turned, and for the first time that evening, a warm, genuine smile touched her lips. "I'm perfectly fine, Helen. Thank you." Helen Wilkins' gaze then shifted to Marcus, and she gave a firm, approving nod. "You got here fast." "I was close," Marcus replied, his voice softening when addressing the old woman. "Thank you for calling, Mrs. Wilkins." The exchange was a quiet demonstration of a network, a web of care and communication that existed entirely beneath the surface of the neighborhood the boys thought they dominated. Ethan, the tall one, found his voice, a strained whisper directed at Jake. "Dude, the mortgage thing, is that true?" Jake's silence was confirmation enough. Leo buried his face in his hands. "My mom said we got anonymous help. Oh my God." He looked at Eleanor, his eyes wide with a horror different from Jake's, a horror of recognition. "The food pantry, the one at the community center. My mom goes on Thursdays." Ha! She said a nice lady named Eleanor helped her get the paperwork for the utility grant. His voice trailed off, the pieces connecting with devastating clarity. The intruder was the same woman who had provided the groceries in their kitchen and the light bill his father couldn't pay. Marcus let the revelations hang in the air. He looked at the three of them, his earlier intensity now tempered into a grave, judicial calm. You picked a target," he said, his words measured and precise. You saw a black woman walking alone and saw vulnerability. You saw a figure to project your hate onto, but you didn't see a person. You didn't see the treasurer of the neighborhood association. You didn't see the deaconess of First United Church. You didn't see the woman who tutors half the kids on this block, including your sister Jake, in math every Tuesday afternoon. With each title, each role, Eleanor's identity expanded in the boys' minds from a flat, stereotyped image into a multi-dimensional pillar of the community. She was not in the community. She was its connective tissue. "You attacked your own neighborhood," Marcus concluded, the simplicity of the statement rendering it all the more damning. It was then that the distant, waiting sound they had all been subconsciously aware of finally resolved into the distinct wailing approach of sirens. Red and blue lights painted swirling patterns against the trees and house fronts, growing rapidly brighter. Mrs. Wilkins had wisely called the authorities after all, once the immediate threat of violence had been paused by Marcus's arrival. The sound acted like an electric shock on the paralyzed boys. Ethan jolted, looking wildly down the street. Leo started to cry, silent, shaking tears of sheer terror and shame. Jake finally moved, not to run, but his knees seemed to buckle slightly. He looked from the approaching lights to Eleanor, to Marcus, and then to the kind, disappointed face of old Mrs. Wilkins on the porch. His defiance was gone. In its place was the dawning, awful understanding of concrete consequences and a social ruin far deeper than any arrest record. He had not just broken the law, he had violated the unwritten contract of the very community that had silently sustained him. The fortress of his prejudice lay in ruins around him, and standing amidst the wreckage were the people he had supposedly been defending it from. The sirens weren't just coming for him, they were coming because of him, answering a call from the world he had just realized he was irrevocably a part of and had just desperately betrayed. The sirens crested from a distant wail into an overwhelming, shrieking presence. Two police cruisers rounded the corner, their light bars strobing the entire scene in urgent pulses of red and blue, transforming the quiet street into a sudden crime scene. The electronic cacophony seemed to vibrate through the pavement, up through the soles of their shoes and into the hollow cores of the three boys. For Jake, Ethan, and Leo, the sound was the final, deafening confirmation of their catastrophic miscalculation. This was no longer a game of intimidation on a dark street. This was the real world with its consequences, its paperwork, and its cold, hard facts. The car screeched to a halt at oblique angles, blocking the road. Doors flew open. Officers emerged, not with drawn weapons, but with a focused, professional severity that was somehow more intimidating. Their eyes swept the scene. The three panicked teens, the bat on the ground, the imposing man standing protectively near an older woman, and the frail witness on the porch. The narrative was instantly clear to them. Jake stood frozen, not with defiance, but with a kind of systemic shock. The swirling lights painted his pale face in alternating shades of crimson and cobalt, making him look ghostly and ill. His brain, moments ago flooded with hateful bravado, was now a skidding, empty register of terrors. Arrest record, court, his mother's face, his sister's shame, the mortgage secret now public. His hands hung limply at his sides, feeling grotesquely large and useless. Every instinct screamed to run, but his legs were pillars of cement. To run would be to confirm every guilty thing, and besides, where would he go? This was his neighborhood. There was no escape into a faceless crowd. Here, everyone had a name, and now everyone would know his. Ethan had crumpled inward. He slid down the flank of their parked sedan until he was sitting on the curb, his long legs splayed out, his face buried in his varsity jacket. His shoulders shook with silent, ragged sobs. The adrenaline had curdled into pure, unadulterated panic. He was the follower, the one who needed a leader to give him courage, and now his leader was a statue of despair. The word accessory looped in his mind, a legal term from TV shows now terrifyingly personal. Leo was muttering, a stream of frantic, whispered pleas to no one. I'm sorry. We didn't know, we didn't mean it. I just wanted to go home. His eyes were wide, darting from the officers to Mrs. Wilkins to Eleanor, seeking a shred of mercy, finding only grave disappointment or impassive calm. The first officer, a seasoned man with a salt and pepper mustache, approached Marcus and Eleanor. "Everyone all right here?" he asked, his voice a low, steady baritone meant to de-escalate. "We are now, officer," Eleanor said, her voice the only calm center in the storm of light and sound. "Oh." She gestured toward the boys. "These young men threatened me with that bat. They made racially motivated threats." Her statement was clear, factual, and devoid of hysterics. It carried the weight of truth. The officer nodded, his eyes taking in the metallic bat on the pavement. He looked at Marcus. "And you are Marcus Thorne, her son. I arrived as the threat was being made." He didn't offer more, his tone respectful but firm, the tone of a citizen who knows his rights and the gravity of the situation. The second officer, a younger woman, had already moved to secure the bat, using a pen to lift it into an evidence bag. The mundane procedure, the rustle of the plastic, the scribbling on the tag, somehow made it all more horrifyingly real. This was evidence of a crime, their crime. The senior officer turned his attention to the boys. "Which one of you is holding the bat?" The question hung in the air. Jake flinched but said nothing. Leo just cried harder. It was Ethan, from his crumpled position on the curb, who pointed a trembling finger without looking up. Jane. It was Jake. He didn't hit her. He didn't swing. He had it. The betrayal was automatic, a survival reflex, and it shattered the last remnant of their brotherhood. Jake closed his eyes. Jacob Rayner, the officer said, not asking. Stand up, turn around, put your hands behind your back. The use of his full name, the official command. It was a script from 1,000 police dramas, but now he was the protagonist in the worst way imaginable. The mechanical clicking of the handcuffs as they ratcheted shut around his wrists was a cold, final sound. The metal was shockingly cold. As he was guided toward the cruiser, he chanced one last look over his shoulder. He didn't look at the police or at Marcus. He looked at Eleanor. She was watching him, her expression unreadable. Not triumphant, not vengeful. It was the look of a historian observing a tragic, predictable chapter. In that moment, he understood the true depth of his loss. He hadn't just lost his freedom for the night. He had lost his place. He had become a lesson, a cautionary tale in the very community he had foolishly claimed to defend. The cruiser door closed with a solid, muffled thud, sealing him in a quiet, plastic-smelling tomb. The world outside now just a silent, swirling light show watched by the faces of the neighbors he never really knew. The freeze was permanent. The Crestview police station was a study in sterile, fluorescent-lit reality. The buzzing lights overhead replaced the erratic street lamp, and the smell of stale coffee and industrial cleaner supplanted the night air. For Jake, seated on a hard plastic chair in a small, windowless interview room, the world had narrowed to this. The grain of the laminate table under his fingertips, the oppressive hum of the ventilation, and the slow ticking passage of time that felt like drops of water eroding stone. The handcuffs had been removed, but the ghost of their cold pressure remained on his wrists, a permanent brand. Across from him sat the senior officer from the scene, Officer Brandt, and a female detective with a calm, unreadable face. A digital recorder sat between them, its tiny red light a glaring, unblinking eye. The procedural machinery was in motion. They had read him his rights. They had taken his statement, which was a halting, fragmented thing, collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. Though we were just messing around, we didn't mean it. She was talking back. They had presented him with the evidence bag containing the bat. They had played a brief, clear audio clip from Mrs. Wilkins' 911 call, her frightened, firm voice stating, "There are boys with a bat threatening Eleanor Thorne on Cedar Lane. Hurry, please." In that recording, he heard the terror they had caused, made real and immutable. But the interrogation took a turn he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about the night. "Jacob," Detective Vargas began, her voice neither kind nor cruel, simply factual. "Help me understand the thought process. You see a woman walking down a public street in your own neighborhood. What was the threat?" Jake stared at the table. "A she didn't belong," he mumbled, the phrase now tasting like ash in his mouth. "Based on what?" Officer Brandt asked, leaning forward. "Her voter registration? Her property tax records? Because we pulled those." Eleanor and Marcus Thorne have owned the home on Sycamore for 28 years. She's on the executive board of the Crestview Community Trust. That's a matter of public record. Each fact was a nail. He had no answer. His prejudice had no paperwork. "You mentioned to her something about you people," Detective Vargas continued, consulting her notes. "Can you define you people for me?" The room felt impossibly small. The definition, which had felt so solid and righteous in the dark, now dissolved under the bright lights and bureaucratic gaze. It was unsayable. To say it would be to speak the quiet part loud, to engrave his bigotry into an official record. He remained silent. "We've spoken with Ethan Cole and Leo Merrick," Officer Brandt said, shifting tactics. "They're in other rooms. Their stories are evolving. But they both agree on one thing. You were the one who demanded they stop. You were the one who took the bat from the car. You were the one who made the specific threats regarding her place. That moves this from a group mischief incident to something more serious. Aggravated menacing. Ethnic intimidation. Those are felony considerations, Jacob." The word felony landed like a physical blow. It wasn't a TV word anymore. It was a word that defined futures, that closed doors to colleges, jobs, everything. His vision swam. "Your mother is on her way," Detective Vargas said, and for the first time, Jake saw a flicker of something like pity in her eyes. It was worse than anger. Ashi's very distressed. She's been contacted by the Community Trust's victim advocate as well. Victim. The word attached itself to Eleanor Thorne and it fit. He was the perpetrator. The taxonomy was simple and devastating. Meanwhile, in the sterile, bright waiting area, Cynthia Rayner had arrived, her face drawn and pale, still wearing her medical center scrubs under a light jacket. She wasn't alone. To her visible confusion, Helen Wilkins was there too, sitting patiently on a vinyl chair, her hands folded over her cane. The old woman had insisted on coming, not to accuse, but to bear witness in full. "Cynthia," Mrs. Wilkins said softly as Jake's mother approached the front desk, her voice trembling. Cynthia turned, recognition dawning through her panic. "A Mrs. Wilkins? What are you?" Then the connection clicked. Her son, the bat, the street where Mrs. Wilkins lived, the call she'd made. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, God. Helen, I'm so sorry." Senator Thorne said, her voice firm. "Senator Thorne, your Senator Thorne, your son threatened a woman who runs the families in need fund." Cynthia Rayner's knees almost gave way. She remembered the discreet, anonymous grant that had saved them from foreclosure. The paperwork had been handled with such compassion, no questions asked, only a handwritten note that read, "This community takes care of its own." She had wept with relief. Now, the shame was a nausea so profound she had to lean against the wall. The benefactor and the target were the same person. Her son had raised a bat to the very hand that had held them up. Back in the interview room, Officer Brandt's radio crackled. He listened, then looked at Jake with a new grim expression. "Your friends have given full statements, Jacob. They've confirmed the racial nature of the slurs used. They've confirmed you as the instigator and primary threat. They're being processed for release to their parents. But you're being detained. We're placing you under arrest for aggravated menacing and bias-motivated intimidation. You have the right to an attorney." The formal charge was the final seal. The machinery had processed him, labeled him, and now moved to incarcerate him. As he was led from the room, hands cuffed again before the eyes of other officers and staff, Jake saw his mother through the window of the waiting area. She saw him, her face collapsing into an agony of love and horror. And next to her, Mrs. Wilkins did not look away. She held his gaze, her old eyes filled with a sadness so deep it seemed to hold generations of disappointment. In that moment, Jacob Rayner understood completely. His punishment was not just the cell that awaited him. It was the searing, irreversible knowledge of who he had betrayed and the crushing weight of the debt he could never repay. The community had not turned its back on him. It had simply shown him with brutal clarity the reflection of his own. The holding cell was a cubicle of despair, but the small interview room they led Jake back to felt like a courtroom. Ethan and Leo were already there, seated on one side of the table, their parents standing stiffly behind them like grim sentinels. The air was thick with a humid mixture of shame, anger, and fear. Leo's father kept rubbing his temples, his eyes closed. Ethan's mother stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched so tight a muscle flickered in her cheek. Jake's mother, Cynthia, sat beside him, her hand occasionally fluttering toward his arm before pulling back as if he were both her child and something repulsive. They had been told someone wanted to speak to them before any further processing. The door opened, and Marcus Thorne entered. He was not in uniform, but his presence commanded the room more completely than any officers had. He carried no fold or no visible weapon. His power was in his calm, his utter stillness, and the gravity in his eyes. He didn't look at the parents first or the officers by the door. His gaze swept over the three boys, holding each for a second, Leo's tear-streaked face, Ethan's hollow stare, Jake's defiant but crumbling scowl. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing them in. For a long moment, he simply stood at the head of the table, saying nothing. The silence was a pressure, forcing them to sit in the discomfort of what they had done. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, not needing to project. "And my mother is home. She's making tea." He let that ordinary, domestic fact hang there. It was a stark contrast to the stainless steel reality of the police station. She's not pressing charges for assault. The state, however, will press charges for the threats, the intimidation, the hate crime. That's out of her hands now. That's the world you brought to her doorstep. What? Cynthia Rayner let out a soft, choked sob and buried her face in her hands. Jake flinched. I'm not here to yell at you, Marcus continued, his tone almost conversational, which was somehow worse. I'm not here to threaten you. My mother asked me to come. She said you might need to see the consequence standing in front of you, not in a uniform, but in the flesh of the family you targeted. He pulled out the empty chair at the head of the table and sat leaning forward, his elbows on the steel table. You wanted to know her place. Let me tell you about her place. Her place was holding me as a baby in a homeless shelter after a fire took our first apartment. Her place was working 2 jobs so I could go to a school outside our district, so I could have the chances she didn't. Her place was in this neighborhood's TA meetings when no other black parents showed up because they didn't feel welcome. She showed up. She made them welcome her, not by shouting, but by never missing a bake sale, by always having the sign-up sheets filled out, by knowing every child's name. He looked at Jake. Her place was sharing the fun that saved your family's home, Jacob. She fought for that. She argued that a family's hardship shouldn't cost them their dignity or their shelter. She protected your mother's dignity while you were in the street trying to strip hers away. Jake looked at the table, his breath coming in short hitches. You see a black woman and you think you know her story, Marcus said, his voice hardening just a fraction. You think it's a story of struggle and anger. You're half right. The struggle is real. But the anger, he shook his head. She transmuted that anger a long time ago into fuel, into compassion. The anger you felt tonight, that hot, stupid, destructive fire, she took that same feeling and she forged it into a tool for building. She built a community. She built a legacy. She built me. He paused, letting the words sink into the silent room. And you looked at that legacy, at that lifetime of steadfast, graceful building, and you saw something to tear down with a baseball bat. He didn't raise his voice. The quiet disappointment was a heavier indictment. You attacked a founder, a matriarch. You didn't assault a stranger. You desecrated a monument you were too ignorant to recognize. Ethan began to cry silently, his broad shoulders shaking. Leo was already weeping, his father's hand now a heavy, resigned weight on his shoulder. Marcus leaned back. The law will decide your legal punishment. That's fair. But your real sentence, the one that will matter for the rest of your life, is the knowledge of what you almost did. You almost destroyed a sacred thing. You almost became the boys who beat Eleanor Thorne. And in this city, in this community, that name would have haunted you longer than any prison term. He stood up, the chair scraping softly. My mother won't define herself by your hatred. She never has. But you will now have a choice. Will you define yourselves by this moment of stupid, hateful weakness? Or will you learn from the woman you thought was beneath you? He looked at each of them a final time. She believes you can learn. That's the kind of woman she is. It's the only reason I'm here. The rest is up to you. He turned and left the room, the door closing with a soft final click. No one spoke. The space he left behind was filled with a new, profound silence, not of fear, but of overwhelming, unbearable clarity. In that silence, the monument of Eleanor Thorne stood fully revealed, not as a victim, but as a judge whose mercy was more daunting than any wrath. And at its base, 3 boys began the long, hard look at the rubble of their own prejudices, wondering if they had the strength to build something new from it. The morning sun, clear and forgiving, streamed through the bay window of Eleanor Thorne's living room, laying warm stripes across the polished hardwood floor. The house was quiet, filled only with the soft burble of a kettle coming to boil in the kitchen and the distant chirp of sparrows in the bird feeder she kept filled year-round. Seated in her well-worn armchair, a quilt her own mother had stitched draped over its back, Eleanor held a steaming mug of tea in both hands, letting the warmth seep into her bones. The previous night felt both immediate and distant, a vivid nightmare, examined in the calm light of day. Her body was tired, a deep soul-level fatigue, but her spirit, to her own quiet surprise, felt unbroken. It felt, if anything, confirmed. On the shelf across from her, photographs chronicled a life of joyful building, Marcus in cap and gown beaming. Marcus and his wife on their wedding day, Eleanor in a vibrant blue dress smiling with her eyes crinkled. Pictures of community gardens in bloom, of children holding up painted signs at a park opening, of a much younger Eleanor standing with a group of neighbors before a newly built playground. These were not just memories. They were proof of concept. They were evidence that love, persistently applied, could shape physical space and communal heart. A gentle knock at the front door stirred her from her reverie. She rose, setting her tea aside, and opened it to find Helen Wilkins standing on her porch, holding a small basket covered with a checkered cloth. The older woman's eyes, magnified behind her glasses, searched Eleanor's face with tender urgency. I brought scones, Helen said, her voice a little frail. From the bakery you like. I couldn't just sit over there. Eleanor smiled, a genuine, warm expression that reached her eyes. Helen, you are a treasure. Come in, please. Inside, Helen settled on the sofa, her hands worrying the edge of the basket cloth. The whole street is talking, Eleanor, she said softly. Not in a bad way. In a shocked way. The Rayner's boy. It's unthinkable. Cynthia came over this morning before the sun was up. She was beside herself. She tried to give me a check for the fund, as if money could. It can't, Eleanor finished gently, taking a scone. But her wanting to is a start. How is she? Devastated, ashamed. But there's something else. She said Jake asked for a notepad and a Bible this morning. He wouldn't say why. Helen shook her head. I don't know what happens now. Now, Eleanor said, gazing out the window where a young mother pushed a stroller past, the real work begins. Or it doesn't. That's always the choice. She turned back to Helen. Last night wasn't about me, Helen. Not really. Not really. It was about a sickness in those boys, a sickness that tells them they are small unless they make someone else feel smaller. I was just the nearest mirror. The law will deal with the act. The community has to deal with the sickness. Helen nodded, her eyes glistening. You're a better woman than I am, Eleanor. I'd be so angry. Oh, I have anger, Eleanor admitted, her voice still calm. A deep old river of it. But I learned a long time ago that if I let that river flood its banks, it doesn't drown the people who hurt me. It drowns my own garden. It washes away everything I've tried to build. So I dug canals, I channel it, into the fund, into the tutoring, into showing up. Last night I channeled it into standing still. Her phone buzzed softly on the side table. It was a text from Marcus, all quiet on the Western Front. Court date set for initial hearing. Di's taking it seriously. I love you. She typed back a simple heart. He's a good son, Helen remarked. Watching her, he is my greatest victory, Eleanor said. Not because of what he does, but because of who he is. A man who protects, who builds, who understands that power is a tool for stewardship, not domination. That's the lesson those boys haven't learned. And maybe after last night, the first seed of it has been planted in very hard, very stony soil. Later, after Helen had left, Eleanor returned to her chair. The sun had climbed higher, warming the room. She thought of Jake in a cell, of Cynthia's anguish, of the confused shame on Leo's and Ethan's faces. She felt no vindication. She felt a profound maternal sorrow for the journey ahead of them, a journey out of a self-imposed darkness. Her victory was not their defeat. Her victory was that she was still here in her home and her heart undiminished. The bat had been meant to shatter her peace, but it had only proven its resilience. The story was already weaving itself into the fabric of Crestview. It would be told at coffee shops and whispered in line at the grocery store. The tale of the racist teens who froze when they learned the black woman's son was Marcus Thorne, the community pillar. But Eleanor knew the deeper truth. They hadn't frozen because of who her son was. They had frozen when they finally saw her, not a symbol, not a target, but a person of immense, quiet consequence. A living root system so deep and so wide that trying to chop it down revealed they were standing on the very ground it held together. She finished her tea, now cold. Outside, the neighborhood continued its day, scarred but intact. The monument still stood, and in its shadow, 3 boys now had to decide if they would remain vandals or if they would pick up a different tool and, however clumsily, try to learn how to build.